In February 2024, the mayor of Brampton, Canada, Patrick Brown, said officials discovered 25 students all packed into a single apartment living there illegally. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The mayor's convinced there could be around 100,000 residents living in illegal rental spaces in Brampton, and the city plans to tackle this issue. Because the problem is real, other incidents recorded in Brampton are even more shocking. At Walmart parking lots in the city, you'll find cars where entire families spend the night. That means two people working full-time jobs can no longer afford basic housing for their kids. Other unfortunates are forced to live in their cars parked on the property of a homeowner who rents out several rooms. You think I'm joking? No, here's the story. And here's the comment it got. This is what happens when housing becomes unaffordable. Life in Canada gets tougher every year, and it doesn't look like there's any way to stop it. But what happened? Let's figure it out. Just need to grab myself a cup of coffee first. I unobtrusively remind to feel free to skip ahead those who don't want to unobtrusively hit the like button, unless of course you forget to do it. And thanks for respecting my wish to stay anonymous. So what's going on? Honestly, nothing good. 2024 turned out to be another tough year for Canadians. For some time, the country's been teetering on the brink of a rental crisis, and it just keeps getting worse. According to a recent report from Yahoo Finance, by 2032, monthly rent might hit $7,500 in Vancouver and $5,600 in Toronto. Montreal, Calgary, and other major cities are likely to face similar increases. There isn't enough housing. Demand is sky high, and landlords are raising rents to crazy heights. Here's what housing prices in Canada look like. From 2011 to 2022, they've gone up by about 50%, which is a pretty steep rise. Recent data reveals that renting a home is a big issue for 95% of Canadians, and 2/3 are in favor of stricter rent regulations to help address the situation. A 68-year-old woman from Calgary shared that her rent went up by $400 a month. She and her husband live on a fixed income and skip meals to save money. We end up with about $35 each. What do you get for $10 in the grocery store? The woman complains. Another resident said that her rent went up by as much as $800, and it happened suddenly in just 1 month. A similar increase is being seen in New Brunswick, where over 40% of people spend a third of their income on housing. In British Columbia, they're facing similar issues. 16% of renters are spending over 50% of their income just to have a roof over their heads. If there are no available housing options, tenants are forced to live in unreliable, uncomfortable, and sometimes even unsafe places. For example, 7% of renters in British Columbia live in apartments that need major repairs, and 11% live in overcrowded conditions. That is, too many people in too little space. Overcrowded houses, crumbling walls, broken windows and doors, black mold, cold. These are the conditions that ordinary people have to deal with. People who work, study, and contribute to society. Yet they're forced to live like this, just because rent prices have shot up to outrageous levels. Available homes are disappearing across the country at an alarming rate. In more than 1,000 neighborhoods of Canada's largest cities, less than 1% of the housing is left open and affordable for most Canadian renters. And this has been going on since 2018. That's when the average rent for a 2-bedroom house started rising 70% faster than wages. By the way, what about buying apartments? Well, for most Canadians who don't own property, the dream of having their own place feels out of reach. 76% of people who don't own a home say they also can't afford to buy one, and they don't see it happening anytime soon. The reasons are the same: inflated prices, and they just don't have the ability to save for a down payment. All the money goes into rent, well, and into food. How did Canada end up like this? In short, the country's population growth is outpacing housing construction. Since demand for housing exceeds supply, prices are rising. The construction industry is struggling to keep up, but without success. To avoid making the crisis worse, the pace of construction needs to increase 6 times compared to the current rate, especially in high-demand areas like Toronto. Partly, population growth is caused by temporary immigration. Right now, the federal government's trying to handle the situation by setting quotas on the number of visas. In theory, this should help in the long run, but people have already arrived, and they already need to be housed somewhere. And since we're talking about immigration, we should look into what's happening. Actually, experts are shocked by Canada's demographic evolution over the past 3 decades. From 1991 to 2015, that is, since the current government was first elected, Canada's annual population growth was predictable. On average, it was about 320,000 people a year. However, after 2015, this growth quickly sped up. In 2016, it exceeded 400,000 people, reaching almost 600,000 by 2019. Then came COVID and a predictable temporary decline. But it was way too temporary. In 2021, the increase was 509,285 people, and in 2022, it shot up to 930,422 people, finally hitting an astronomical 1,270,000 people in 2023. That means for decades, Canada's population growth rate was around 1% per year, but in the past few years, that number has more than tripled, reaching 3.2% in 2023. And yes, most of Canada's population growth is due to temporary immigration. Without it, the growth would be 1.2%, at least according to Statistics Canada, so the growth would be pretty much the same as before 2015. When you compare it, the population growth in 2023 is like adding an entire new Saskatchewan to Canada's overall population. This happened in under a year, and almost all of Saskatchewan's population is made up of immigrants from other countries. Actually, Canada has a very long immigration history. Millions of people from all over the world have chosen and continue to choose Canada as their new home. In 2021, over 8.3 million people, or nearly a quarter of the population, were immigrants at the time of the study or had already become citizens but came from another country or at the very least had permanent residency. From 2016 to 2021, immigrants made up 4/5 of the workforce growth, and if these trends continue, by 2041, immigrants could make up anywhere from 29.1% to 34% of Canada's population. About 68% of those surveyed in 2018 said that immigrants make the country stronger, and that's a really good number. Canada is a world leader in refugee resettlement, and over the past 50 years, it's earned a reputation as a country that values newcomers. The Canadian Multiculturalism Act, passed in 1988, recognizes diversity as an essential part of Canada's identity. It's protected by the Constitution. In general, the immigration system has always been seen by the public as open and well-regulated.
Canada is a country that was built by immigration.
In 2015, when the big shift happened, the country's prime minister became Justin Trudeau. It was he and his government who started pushing multiculturalism as a key part of Canada's identity. Immigration, which was already viewed positively, became even more strongly encouraged.
Canada is an opening and welcoming society. These values have always defined who we are.
There's more to come. At the end of 2018, the Marketing and Media Department of the Ministry of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship of Canada launched the Immigration Matters campaign. It was aimed at helping create a positive and fact-based public view of immigration. The thing is, the Canadian economy partly relies on the workforce and the taxes that the workforce pays. The more immigrants work, the stronger the workforce becomes, especially as the country's population ages and fewer kids are being born than before. Immigrants provide and improve medical and social services because many of them are young, which means they bring more money into the healthcare system than they spend. Also, they fully integrate into Canadian society. About 1/3 of immigrants in Canada have worked as volunteers, and 2/3 are members of community organizations. It's simple. The more newcomers get involved in the life of their new home, the more they want to give back. So Canada has it all figured out. A large number of immigrants are also seen as a hope for solving the demographic crisis. Canada's population is getting older, and the birth rate is still below the replacement level. It's basically a common issue for many countries. According to recent census data, more than 1 in 5 people were nearing retirement age, which is a record high. There were more of them than young people aged 15 to 24. Although immigration can't stop the aging process of the population, it, let's say, has a rejuvenating effect, simply because people usually migrate when they're young. The only thing is, this doesn't seem to be enough. Canada's a country with a low birth rate. The birth rate dropped from 1.47 children per woman in 2019 to a record low of 1.4 children per woman in 2020. I know it sounds strange to talk about tenths and hundredths of a child, but that's the statistics. You can't get around it. In 2020, Canada also saw the lowest number of births since 2007 and the biggest annual drop in birth rates since 1997. You can guess why: COVID. So these two factors, an aging population and fewer kids, are coming together to form a real problem. And it's getting more real every year. In 2022, the highest number of people in Canada retired. This accelerates the mass departure of the most qualified workers, leaving companies in a difficult situation. Wages are growing rapidly because businesses have to figure out how to keep their staff, but labor productivity is in danger of falling even further. You can tell how serious the situation is by this graph. In 1966, there were almost 8 working-age people for every retired person. By 2002, that number was about 5. Today, the ratio is 1 to 3, and it's only going to get worse. By 2056, they're predicting just 2 working people for every retiree. And all the problems actually are connected. Think about it. In a country where you can't even afford to buy or rent a decent place, it doesn't really make sense to have a second kid. Some people even hesitate to have the first one. So the demographic crisis just keeps getting worse. So what about immigrants? Well, after several decades, the country, which had been open to newcomers and with immigration policy aimed at boosting the population with the help of immigrants, finally decided to change its course. Surveys were conducted, and for the first time in 25 years, a clear majority of Canadians said there's too much immigration, and this view is only getting stronger. Nearly 6 out of 10, that's 58% of Canadians, now think the country's letting in too many people from abroad. By comparison, only 44% of the population shared this opinion in 2023. And there's no need to even mention how different things were in 2018. Now Canadians no longer see immigrants as a blessing, or at least as people who don't cause any harm. Immigrants have become a problem. Even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he's planning to significantly reduce the number of people allowed to enter Canada. This is a big change for both the country and Trudeau himself, because the ideas he ran on are basically what led to the situation we're seeing today. The Prime Minister faced criticism and a drop in approval ratings, and here's his response. In October 2024, Trudeau and Immigration Minister Mark Miller introduced the toughest immigration measures yet, cutting the number of people granted permanent residency by 21% in 2025. He also admitted his mistake, saying, "Canadians are justifiably proud of their immigration system. It's made our economy the envy of the world." But the government didn't get the balance quite right. Now Canada's immigration system needs to be stabilized. Will it help solve the problems? No one knows. Time will tell. But for now, Canadians have to deal with other difficulties that make life in the country unbearable. Unfortunately, it's not just the housing crisis. There are also landslides. They pose a constant and widespread threat to Canadians' well-being. To deal with them, the country has to spend between $200 and $400 million every year. A landslide is basically any type of slope collapse or downhill movement of rock, sometimes with debris, sometimes without. But sometimes it's just several dozen cubic feet of rock that can be easily removed. Other times it can be more than 2.4 cubic miles. The speed of landslides can range from almost imperceptible to over 62 miles per hour. And that's when landslides become deadly. Landslides are mostly triggered by excessive rainfall, earthquakes, and some types of human activity, and every year, thousands of landslides happen all over Canada. These landslides result in deaths, damage to roads, power lines, pipelines, homes, and other infrastructure, not to mention natural resources. Forests, lakes, and rivers are affected too. Most landslides happen either in the west or the east of the country. From 1771 to 2019, at least 785 people were killed in landslides. A couple of years ago, it marked 50 years since the deadly landslide in Saint-Jean-Vianney, Quebec, that killed 32 people. But landslides aren't the only type of natural disaster that Canadians have to deal with. A survey conducted in March 2024 showed that 85% of residents in British Columbia are afraid of smoke from wildfires, 82% fear the wildfires themselves, 77% are concerned about climate change in general, 67% worry about heavy rains or floods that follow them, and only 40% of the population is afraid of landslides. All these fears are completely natural, especially considering that 2023 was the hottest year on Earth in recorded history. This led to a rise in the number of natural disasters and stronger storms, and with them, an increase in anxiety. Fears can also be triggered by personal and very recent trauma. The McDougal Creek wildfire in August 2023 raged for weeks. Back then, thousands of people had to evacuate. 189 homes were destroyed, not to mention the acres of burned forests. The smoke that formed choked Okanagan for weeks, smudged the sky, shut down the Kelowna International Airport for a week, and made any outdoor activity dangerous. The damage from extreme weather events in 2023 amounted to $3.1 billion. It made the top 10 list of years with the highest weather-related damage, along with 2022. 2024 has become the most expensive year for payouts due to catastrophic weather events, surpassing even 2016, the year of the Fort McMurray wildfire. Back then, over 88,000 people had to evacuate, and the fire destroyed about 2,400 homes and buildings. Another 2,000 residents in 3 communities were relocated after their homes were declared unsafe to live in because of contamination. But the worst part is that disasters leave their mark. When they happen, prices go up. You end up having to spend more on home insurance and your mortgage, as if there weren't enough housing problems already, right? Canadian fire. As I mentioned before, Canada occasionally deals with wildfires. But just recently, something so disastrous happened that it was visible from space. In 2023, NASA's Terra satellite captured how a massive black cloud crossed over 2,000 miles over the Atlantic, reached the skies of Spain and Portugal, and then spread across the Iberian Peninsula. This airflow consisted of tiny particles and harmful gases, including carbon monoxide, and it was so intense that it made the air in some European areas cloudy. Last year, Canada actually faced the most disastrous wildfire season in its history. According to the EU's Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, a record amount of carbon, 160 million tons, was released into the atmosphere due to the fires. Plus, around 500 active fires were recorded, half of which were out of control. The wildfires not only destroyed vast forest areas, but also caused serious health issues for the population due to the smoke spreading into urban areas. The air quality in Montreal, mostly due to the fires, was considered the worst in the world. And also, there were concerns about the air quality in many cities in the central U.S. where the smoke had reached. Can you imagine the scale? All the best for the kids. It's as if Canada didn't already have enough problems. Recently, it turned out that a quarter of the parents in the country are cutting back on their food so their kids can have enough. Just think about that. A big country with a huge economy, and adults are going hungry. It sounds like nonsense, but this is the reality. And it's not just food people are cutting back on. Remember, we talked about a crisis with housing, jobs, and inflation, right? So people save on one thing to be able to buy something else, and it keeps going in a loop. Even the government's having trouble getting enough food. So imagine how the citizens are doing. It's interesting that the survey data was published just as people were waiting for a statement from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who promised to lower taxes on essential goods and services to try to improve the situation in the country. But it seems like that's not going to happen. Anti-record. It might be because the Prime Minister didn't keep his promise that so many citizens are upset with him. A survey conducted in September 2024 found that 67% of respondents don't trust him, which is 4% higher than in June. Only a third of the population, or to be exact, 33%, approve of his actions. This is the lowest score ever. An absolute record, but in a bad way. A survey also revealed that Canadians would like the Parliament to address economic issues. 47% of those surveyed believe the most important task is to reduce the cost of everyday goods, 36% expect to fight against inflation, and 28% want to make housing more affordable. Some might think I'm exaggerating, but the data was gathered by Ipsos, and they're experts in this field. The team is mostly made up of analysts and scientists who know all there is to know about politics and the economy. They conducted a survey with 1,001 Canadians aged 18 and up, and according to the company, the results are 95% reliable. So it seems like things really aren't great in Canada. Lack of happiness. Considering everything I told you about Canada today, it's pretty easy to get a sense of the vibe people have there. According to the 2024 Happiness Report, Canada ranks 15th among the happiest countries, which is 2 spots lower than last year. Which country's number 1? No need to guess, it's Finland. And they've been number 1 for the 7th year straight. But let's get back to Canada and its anti-records. A recent report on the population's well-being shows that Canada ranks 58th in the world for happiness of people under 30. Usually, researchers note that happiness levels gradually decrease with age. In other words, the older you get, the sadder you feel. Still, people aged 15 to 24 feel more satisfied with their lives than older generations. But in Canada, this doesn't hold true. Canada falling behind. Recently, Canada's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, stated that Canada is the best country in the world. A pretty bold statement. However, we already know that things aren't exactly going great in Canada. Compared to other countries, Canadians' financial situation is getting worse, and their standard of living is dropping. Well, you remember. What's worse is that forecasts indicate this trend will continue unless the country's politicians make some serious changes to their work.
You're looking for the sales, you're looking for the discounts to make it more affordable.
From 2014 to 2022, Canada's GDP per person dropped from 80.4% to 72.3%. As a result, Canada's fallen behind key allies and trade partners, including the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. Forecasts show that the average annual growth in GDP per capita in Canada will be the lowest among OECD countries from 2030 to 2060 at just 0.78%. And no, Canada didn't suddenly become greedy. First, for the past 10 years, there hasn't been enough investment in business. Second, more and more people with low education and skills are coming to Canada for a better life. Third, the pace of technological development and innovation has significantly slowed down. So it turns out that these factors combined have led to extremely low or even negative labor productivity growth. This could change if the government takes steps to boost investment in business and innovation, upgrade workers' qualifications, and improve immigration policies. But right now, nothing like that's happening. And Canada keeps falling behind everyone and everything. You owe me the most unobtrusive like. See you later.